The stones were clawed from the inside. That was the chilling whisper that first drew them, an ancient legend clinging to a fortress not so much built as grown from the tormented earth. Not Houska Castle itself, nestled in the Czech Republic, where the local folklore of a bottomless pit, a portal to some nether realm, has terrified generations, but a place far more remote, far more ancient, inspired by its grim legend. Here, buried beneath millennia of forgotten history, rumor spoke of not just a pit, but the Houska pit, a meticulously sealed gateway, not into the earth's molten core, but into something far, far worse. It began with whispers in academic circles, the kind of hushed conversations that hint at discoveries too dangerous for public consumption. Archaeological findings, fragmentary scrolls, and unsettling seismic anomalies beneath a desolate stretch of Eastern European wilderness pointed to an unnaturally deep fissure, meticulously capped by an unknown civilization thousands of years ago. Not just capped, but contained. The original purpose of Houska Castle, they say, was not to keep invaders out, but to keep something in. Our story begins with the terrifying hypothesis that for millennia, something truly ancient, truly malevolent, had been clawing at those confining stones, desperate for release. Dr. Elias Thorne, a man whose career was built on decoding forgotten languages and deciphering occult symbology, spearheaded the expedition. Beside him stood Anya Sharma, a structural engineer with an unnerving practicality and an almost pathological aversion to superstition, along with a team of seasoned cavers, geologists, and a skeletal security detail. Their mission, to investigate the claims, to understand the purpose of this ancient seal, and, if possible, to penetrate its depths. They knew the legends, of course, stories of winged beasts, demonic entities, and the screams of the damned issuing from the abyss. But these were educated individuals, rational minds operating in a world of quantifiable data, or so they told themselves. The journey to the site was arduous, a descent into forgotten lands as much as a physical trek. Days turned into weeks as they navigated treacherous terrain, their vehicles slowly replaced by mules, then by their own strained backs. The air grew heavy, thick with the scent of damp earth and something else, something metallic, faintly sulphurous, that seemed to cling to their clothes and hair. As they neared the designated coordinates, the very landscape seemed to contort, ancient gnarled trees resembling skeletal fingers, reaching for a perpetually overcast sky. The ground underfoot felt strangely spongy, yet resilient, as if the earth itself were holding its breath. Then they saw it. Not a castle, but a colossal, crudely fashioned stone edifice, half buried, half eroded, rising from the earth like a petrified leviathan. Its architecture defied any known historical period, a cyclopean construction of massive, irregular blocks, fitted together with impossible precision, seemingly without mortar. And at its heart, a circular depression, rimmed by stones so weathered they seemed to weep dark stains. This was the entrance to the myth, the gateway that had haunted the Whispers. This was the Houska pit. The initial scans were perplexing. Beneath the surface, the structure descended hundreds of meters, a spiraling corkscrew of engineered stone. It wasn't a natural cavern. It was a shaft, built with purpose, designed to plunge into the deep. Anya, ever the pragmatist, found herself studying the immense capstone that covered the central depression. It was not merely a lid, it was a complex system of interlocking segments, each inscribed with glyphs that pulsed with a faint, almost imperceptible residual energy, even after millennia. Elias recognized some of the symbols: archaic containment runes, wards against psychic intrusion, and others that spoke of a deep understanding of forces beyond the physical realm. The air around the seal was notably colder, a persistent chill that cut through their insulated suits, reaching into their bones. The team rigged their primary descent rig, a network of winches and safety lines, while a battery of sensors began feeding data to their makeshift command center. The first descent, they decided, would be exploratory, a reconnaissance mission. Sergeant Kyle, the head of their security, was the first down. His helmet-mounted camera projected an image onto their main monitor. Swirling dust, the dull sheen of ancient stone, and then nothing. The signal flickered, then stabilized. Kyle reported a distinct drop in temperature, a strange resonance in the air, a feeling of immense pressure, though the atmospheric readings were stable. He reached a landing, the first of many. This wasn't a straight drop. The pit was a labyrinthine spiral, each level sealed with another heavy stone door, each inscribed with more of those unsettling glyphs. They began drilling into the capstone, a process that took days of painstaking work. The stone was harder than any known granite, imbued with an unnatural resilience. Sparks flew. Grinding noises echoed across the desolate landscape, and with each rotation of the diamond-tipped drill, a low hum seemed to emanate from the depths, a sound too deep to be heard, felt only in the chest. When the capstone finally gave way, it wasn't with a crash, but a sigh. A rush of frigid, stagnant air billowed out, carrying with it a scent that defied description. Ancient earth, ozone, something vaguely organic, and an unmistakable hint of iron like old blood. Elias theorized it was the compressed atmosphere of millennia finally released. Anya, however, felt a prickle of unease. It wasn't just air. It felt like a breath, a very, very old breath. The first exploratory team, Kyle and two carvers, descended into the black. Their headlamps cut through an opaque mist that clung to the upper shaft. The walls were not smooth, not naturally formed. They were carved, polished, and etched with symbols that seemed to shift and writhe in the periphery of their vision. Elias, monitoring from above, struggled to identify the language. It was a proto-language, predating anything known, yet eerily consistent. He started to translate fragments, words for bind, endure, deep, and often repeatedly, unmaking. The meaning was horrifyingly clear. This was a prison. Below, Cale reported reaching a chamber, not a mere landing. It was vast, cavernous, yet unmistakably artificial. Its ceiling was lost in shadows, its floor uneven, littered with crumbled masonry and desiccated remains of what might have been ancient sacrifices, or perhaps failed wardens. Anya's sensors registered residual energy signatures unlike anything she'd ever seen. Not electrical, not magnetic, but something else. A resonance that seemed to vibrate at the very edge of perception, an echo of immense power. The cold was profound here, a penetrating chill that sapped their strength and clarity of thought. The cavers, seasoned veterans of subterranean exploration, began to complain of an oppressive feeling, a sense of being watched, an awareness of a vast, unseen presence. One of them, a man named Marek, swore he heard faint, guttural whispers carried on the frigid air, too indistinct to parse, yet laden with an undeniable malevolence. As the days turned into weeks, the expedition became less about exploration and more about endurance. They established a base camp on the first level, a pressurized, hermetically sealed module, attempting to neutralize the strange atmospheric effects. But the pit had its own insidious influence. Equipment malfunctioned with alarming frequency. Batteries drained at an accelerated rate. The static on the comms was no longer just static. It began to form patterns, faint rhythmic pulses that mimicked heartbeats, or perhaps something else entirely. Marek, the caver who had heard whispers, grew increasingly withdrawn, his eyes wide and unfocused, muttering about the hunger and the deep ones. His mental state deteriorated rapidly, forcing Kyle to send him back to the surface, a difficult, perilous journey for one so disturbed. The deeper they went, the more alien the environment became. What had initially seemed like ancient architecture began to twist into impossible geometries, walls angled inward in defiance of gravity, leading to paths that should have intersected, but instead diverged into impossible spaces. The rock itself seemed to breathe, its surface covered in strange glowing fungi that pulsed with a faint, sickly bioluminescence, casting grotesque shadows that danced like phantoms. The air grew thicker, heavier, tasting of something metallic and cloying, like stagnant blood. Geological analysis revealed minerals unknown to science, crystalline formations that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Elias, fascinated and terrified in equal measure, discovered more ancient glyphs, not carved into the stone, but seemingly part of it, as if the rock itself were imbued with the language of its captors. He learned of the Old Watchers, a civilization that existed long before recorded history, who had encountered something unfathomable and, in a desperate act of preservation, entombed it. Not just a creature, but a breach, a tear in the fabric of reality itself, a place where the barriers between dimensions were thin, allowing things from beyond to seep into their world. The pit was not a cage for one entity. It was a plug, a stopper for an interdimensional leak. And whatever was leaking through was slowly, inevitably, dissolving the very nature of existence around it. The words he translated spoke of a hunger that consumed light, a song that unmade thought, and a formless void that coveted form. The whispers grew louder, more distinct. They weren't just Marek's madness. Anya heard them now, a chorus of thin, reedy voices that seemed to resonate directly in her mind, speaking in no language she knew, yet conveying a profound sense of despair and agony. She tried to rationalize it. Infrasound, psychological stress, oxygen deprivation. But the fear was visceral, bone deep. She found herself checking and rechecking her instruments, finding inexplicable fluctuations, energy surges that had no source. Her structural integrity sensors showed impossible stresses on the rock, shifts and tremors that had no geological explanation. It was as if the pit itself were alive, stirring. Kyle's security team, though formidable, began to fray. One of his men, Petrov, began experiencing vivid hallucinations, seeing grotesque figures lurking in the glowing fungi, hearing his dead mother call his name from the absolute darkness beyond their headlamps. He fired his weapon into the shadows, his panicked shouts echoing through the impossible chambers, causing a minor rockfall that nearly crushed Elias. Petrov had to be restrained, sedated, and sent topside with a skeleton crew, another team diminished, another mind broken. The attrition rate was alarming. Elias himself was not immune. He found himself waking in cold sweats, plagued by nightmares of swirling colors and impossible geometries, of voices that spoke directly into his soul, offering forbidden knowledge, promising release from all earthly suffering, but at a terrible price. He saw the claw marks in his dreams too, not just etchings on stone, but deep, ragged gouges, as if something with immense, inhuman strength had tried to tear its way out. Or perhaps, he grimly considered, to tear its way in. They reached what Elias dubbed the Cathedral of Whispers, a vast octagonal chamber suspended precariously over an unseen abyss. The walls here were not merely carved, they were organic, pulsating with that sickly bioluminescence, forming intricate, grotesque patterns that resembled internal organs or perhaps alien flora. Strange, chitinous growths clung to the ceiling, occasionally shedding dust that seemed to sparkle with a malevolent light. The air here was almost suffocatingly thick, heavy with the scent of decay and something sweet, cloying, like rotting flowers. And the whispers were no longer just whispers. They were a cacophony, a discordant choir of anguished voices, each one trying to claw its way into their minds, to drive them mad. Anya swore she could feel the chamber itself vibrating, a low, resonant thrum that seemed to align with her own heartbeat. It was here they found the altar. A massive slab of jet-black stone, impossibly smooth, sat at the center of the chamber. On its surface, a single object rested, a crystal dark and multifaceted, that seemed to absorb all light, yet pulsed with an inner terrible luminescence. It was not a physical crystal in the conventional sense. It was a condensed point of pure wrongness. Touching it sent agonizing waves of psychic feedback, a torrent of alien thoughts and primordial fears. Elias, using a specially shielded probe, managed to get a reading. It was a focal point, a condensed shard of whatever lurked below, a psychic amplifier, perhaps even a beacon. The old Watchers hadn't just sealed the pit. They had placed this crystal here, maybe as a warning, maybe as a way to monitor the thing, or maybe, horrifyingly, as bait. Their descent continued, pushing past the bounds of human endurance and sanity. The pit became a living entity, its walls pulsing, its air thick with the unspoken threats of the ancient unknown. The lower they went, the more pronounced the spatial distortions became. Straight paths would inexplicably loop back on themselves. Distances would stretch or compress. Their mapping equipment struggled, unable to reconcile the impossible geometries with rational coordinates. Anya's sensors indicated a complete breakdown of localized space-time, suggesting that the very laws of physics were unraveling in the pit's crushing embrace. It was then they encountered the true horrors, not physical creatures, not at first, but manifestations. Phantoms formed from their deepest fears. Kyle saw his fallen comrades, their faces twisted in agony, blaming him for their deaths. Anya saw her family, trapped in impossible, suffocating spaces. Elias saw the texts he had spent his life studying, twisting into obscene blasphemies, dissolving into meaningless void. These weren't mere hallucinations. They were projected realities, crafted with malevolent precision to break their minds. The entity below was not merely a passive threat. It was intelligent, sentient, and unspeakably ancient. It understood them. It sought to unravel them. The final chamber was not a chamber at all, but a void. They stood on a narrow ledge, carved from the same impossible stone, overlooking an abyss that stretched into infinity, devoid of any light save for the distant, pulsating glow of things they couldn't comprehend. There was no bottom, just a churning, swirling chaos of color and shadow, of impossible forms shifting and writhing in the unfathomable depths. It was the gateway itself, not a portal, but a wound in reality. A place where the primal chaos of a dimension beyond human comprehension bled into their own. And from that chaos, something emerged. Not a monster with teeth and claws, but a concept given form. A swirling vortex of pure anti-light. A shifting geometry that defied every law of perception. It was made of darkness and dread, of silence and screaming, of everything that should not be. It was the unmaking Elias had translated, given horrific reality. It was the source of the whispers, the hunger that consumed light, the song that unmade thought. It was the entity the old Watchers had desperately tried to contain. And it was now stirring, roused by their foolish intrusion. Anya's instruments screamed, registering an energy spike that threatened to overwhelm their systems. The structural integrity of the entire pit began to fail. The stone groaned, cracked, and dust rained down from unseen heights. Kyle, though terrified, understood the immediate danger. The containment was failing, the entity was pushing through, and the only way to stop it was to seal the pit once more, even if it meant burying themselves alive. Elias, gripped by a terrible, desperate clarity, understood the Old Watcher's final act. They had not just sealed the pit. They had imbued the very structure with their own life force, their own essence, to create a living prison. And they had been clawing not to get out, but to reinforce the seals from within, to hold back the encroaching chaos. The claw marks were not a sign of something trying to escape. They were the desperate, fading efforts of guardians trying to maintain the integrity of their impossible prison. With the last of their strength, Anya and Kyle initiated the automated resealing sequence, a desperate, pre-programmed contingency they had prepared, hoping it would never be needed. Charges detonated, sending massive stone blocks hurtling into place. The ground shuddered violently. The abyss below roiled with furious energy, the formless horror thrashing against the rapidly closing void. Elias, standing on the precipice of the abyss, felt a pull, a siren song of ultimate knowledge and absolute oblivion. He resisted, barely. He saw faces in the churning chaos, not just the entity, but the faces of the Old Watchers, their silent screams echoing through time, urging him to complete their work. The final moments were a blur of collapsing rock, agonizing screams from the void, and the overwhelming feeling of being crushed, not by stone, but by the sheer unbridled horror of existence unraveling. Kyle and Anya, working with a frantic, desperate energy, managed to trigger the final failsafe, a series of massive reinforced steel plates that slammed into place above them, cutting them off from the surface, from hope, from everything. They had succeeded. The pit was sealed. But at what cost? The last transmission from the Houska pit was not a cry for help, nor a triumphant announcement of containment. It was a single, distorted whisper, barely audible over the static. Elias's voice, broken and ancient, laced with a terrible understanding. The stones were clawed from the inside, not to get out, but to hold it in. And now, we are the stones. The world above remained ignorant. The desolate wilderness swallowed the evidence of their expedition, leaving only the legend of the Houska pit and the chilling silence that fell over the region. No rescue mission was ever mounted, for no one knew what they were truly rescuing them from. The final log entries, salvaged from a remote data beacon that somehow broadcasted through the earth, spoke of the lingering horrors within the now sealed pit. Of Anya, silently carving intricate, impossible geometries into the stone walls of their makeshift shelter, her eyes vacant, humming the discordant song of the void. Of Kyle, standing guard against shadows that no longer existed, whispering ancient names to ward off unseen entities, his grip on his weapon white-knuckled and desperate. And of Elias, whose last entry spoke of understanding the true nature of the Old Watcher's sacrifice, of becoming one with the prison, of giving oneself over to the unending struggle against the unmaking, to ensure that the fragile reality of the world above remained undisturbed. The Houska pit remains sealed, its secrets buried deep, its horrors contained once more. But sometimes when the wind blows just right over that desolate landscape, a faint metallic scent can be detected, a hint of ozone and old blood. And sometimes, if you listen very closely, you can almost hear a low, resonant thrum, felt more in the chest than in the ears, a reminder that something ancient, something unspeakably dreadful, still lies beneath, endlessly struggling against its eternal prison. And somewhere, in the lightless depths, the stones continue to be clawed from the inside. Not by something trying to escape, but by those who became the keepers, the guardians of the gateway, enduring an eternal torment to ensure that what lurks in the void never again breaches the fragile membrane of our reality. They are the new stones, the new keepers, and their silence is the loudest scream of all.